What's up, Crossers? So today I'm joined by John, an English teacher based in New York. I recently read his comments on YouTube. It was a YouTube video about shadowing practices, and he was so adamantly against it. And I got really curious about what he thinks is the best way to learn a foreign language because his Korean is pretty good. Unfortunately, we're doing this interview in English for educational purpose, but you gotta check out his channel. His Korean is so good. All right, so without further ado, let's meet John. John, hi there.
Hi, how's it going?
Doing great. Yeah, thank you for accepting my request for an interview.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I've seen your channel for a while. I've been watching it for a while, and I'm really excited to be here. My name is John Karate. I was born here in New York. I've been to Korea a couple times, but I'm living here now, and I've been learning Korean for the past 5.5 years. And throughout that process, there's been a lot of trial and error. But I think I've gotten to a pretty comfortable level. But of course, I'm never stopping. I'm going to keep learning. But I just like to take what I've learned and what other people have learned and use that to help Koreans mainly, but also now English speakers as well, who are trying to learn foreign languages. And the main goal of my channel is to teach people how to learn a language. So not teaching a language itself, but how to learn a language.
One thing you didn't mention, what's your channel name?
So my channel, so my channel name in English is John's Language Learning, and my channel name in Korean is 존쌤의 언어 습득법. So if you're interested in checking out these sort of videos where I talk about language learning, then come take a visit.
Yeah, definitely. Let's start with my first question, okay? So you've lived in Korea for some time, is that correct?
I lived in Korea in 2017 for 1 year and 2019 for 1 year.
I mean, like your Korean proficiency, it's just amazing, considering the amount of time that you spend in Korea is less than 2 years. So it's really amazing, man.
I appreciate that, but I don't think I wouldn't call it amazing. I would call it decent. Yeah.
Okay, you're a humble guy. All right, so my question is, you've seen Korean English learners firsthand here in Korea, right? So based upon your observation, right? So what do you think is the biggest problem of Korean English learners?
I would say not only for Koreans, but for a lot of language learners around the world, maybe the biggest problem is that there is this huge focus on speaking practice. And in the language learning world, you can call this output, which is, practicing the language in order to get better at it. And the reason that this is such a big problem is that humans generally don't learn language through practice. We learn language through input, and the usage of that language is then applied through either actual usage or practice. So if you think about the phrase, learning a language, practice shouldn't be involved in that conversation because that's the application, that's the usage of the language. So when I see Koreans trying to learn English, and I was this way when I first started too, starting from speaking practice, trying to pronounce things correctly, trying to memorize phrases and then say those phrases, making a free talking session with a native in order to practice a few vocabulary words that they've learned over the past couple of weeks. And I would say if it's not the biggest problem, it's definitely like number 2 or number 3, because there's a couple, but having speaking practice as your driver for increasing your linguistic ability is super dangerous in my opinion, and is not very effective at all.
All right, so such an interesting point because I think a lot of English learners in Korea, when they first hear about your thoughts on language learning, they might think it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because you're saying, oh, no, you shouldn't place too much emphasis on output. Instead, you should place more emphasis on input, right? Because here in Korea, a lot of people think their weakness when it comes to their English is speaking. So that's why they're so obsessed with practicing and try to talk to native speakers. So your message to those Koreans who are now confused?
When I first started learning Korean, I also started from speaking practice. And then about 6 months into it, I came across some language learners on YouTube and thankfully, luckily, found a good path. And that's the path of input. The thing is that you could break language activity into basically 5 activities. 3 of those are input, 2 of those are output. The 3 language activities of input are listening, reading, and watching. And most people don't talk about watching, but watching is when you're actually looking at something with a visual stimulus and hearing something at the same time. And then the output activities are speaking and writing. The thing that people glaze over, the thing that people tend to forget, or just don't ever think about or don't know, is that the only way you can speak, the only way you can write, is if you have the language in your head. So, if you never heard a word before, if you never read a word before, you can never say that word or speak that word. The cause of speaking is input. The cause of writing is input. And you get that input through hearing the language, seeing the language, and reading the language. Those are the 3 ways you get language. So if there's no language inside your head, then you can't take language out of your head and put it through words or put it through words on paper. It's impossible because you've never heard it before. You've never come across it before. So what happens is that maybe in the first week of learning, most people understand this. So for the first week, they'll learn a couple words, a couple phrases, and then they'll go, oh, now I need to start speaking practice because they have 50, 100 words. But this isn't the case. The case is that in order to have a meaningful conversation with someone, in my opinion, at a high level, you want to be able to hear what they're saying and understand what they're saying. So my opinion is that you should place a really heavy emphasis on input so that your output, the effect, comes naturally.
Okay, so I think the time that is needed for a language learner to get enough input so that their output comes naturally, right? It might vary from person to person, obviously, but do you think there's a set amount of time, like at least like you should spend this amount of time getting the input before you move on to practicing and speaking?
Well, I'll say before you start speaking, you should pretty much, in my opinion, be able to understand 90% of everything you hear and everything you read. Maybe 90% of everything you read and 95% of everything you hear. At that point, you could say you're advanced. Once you're at a low advanced or a high advanced level, then speaking practice is worthwhile because you don't have that much more to learn. You've learned most of the language, right? Of course, the detail comes in the 5%, the 10% of the missing language that you don't have, but it's okay to practice at that point because even if you spent all your time on input once you're advanced, the gains are going to be a lot less. So at that point, once you have this huge vocabulary base, this huge understanding of the language, then you have so much you can practice, it's worthwhile. But when you're a beginner and you don't have this huge vocabulary base, you don't have a lot to work with, practicing that's not going to help you because you're still not going to understand the majority of the language. So I could say once you're advanced, then I think practicing is worthwhile. And until that point, spending most of your time on listening, watching, and reading is way more valuable.
Do you recommend students religiously avoid practicing their speaking? Like, I'm not doing it at all until they get there? Or are you saying they should place just more emphasis on the input?
Here's my opinion on this. And because I know a lot of people, that's it's kind of scary to say, well, don't speak at all, right? No, what I want to make sure that I say clearly is that I don't think you should spend time on practicing English, practicing speaking. So let's say, for example, you only have an hour a day to dedicate to English, then don't spend any of that time speaking practice. It's not worth your time. However, let's say you're in a cafe and your friend introduces you to their foreign friend who speaks English. Well, now in your everyday life, you have an opportunity to speak English with someone who speaks the language that you're interested in. Yeah, speak to that person and enjoy your life and, meet new people and have new experiences. What I'm saying is that when you have 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day and you're not advanced, you want to get to the level so that you are advanced. And the only way you could do that, in my opinion, is through an insane amount of input. So if you have the opportunity to use the language, or if you're bored and you're at home and you want to talk to a foreigner because you're interested in foreign people, because you're interested in that country, then yeah, go on Hello Talk, go on a website and make some foreign friends, learn some new things through those people. But your dedicated time to getting better at the language shouldn't be focused on speaking practice until you're at a really high level.
So here in Korea, a lot of people believe that they have spent already too much time on the input, like throughout their 12 years of public education. They learned the vocabulary and they practiced their listening and they read countless texts and books, as they prepared for the college entrance exam. So when they first hear about your approach, they might think like, what are you talking about? I already spent too much time on the input.
Yeah.
It's time for the output.
Yeah.
I want to practice speaking more. Is there anything you want to say to those people?
Let's say you're a Korean who's spent over 10 years in school learning English, right? You might think that you've gotten a lot of input, but I would say that you actually haven't gotten almost any real input at all. And I'll try to back this by saying, how many movies have you actually seen? Hollywood movies, for example, without any subtitles. If it's not over a couple hundred, then you haven't seen that many real native language movies. How many novels have you read? How many books have you read in English from start to finish without translating, without just reading for fun? If it's not over, let's say 20, 30, 40, you haven't read that much. So the thing is that in school, and it's not just in Korea, it's all over the place, the type of language that we're getting in school is not real native content. Real native content is content made by native speakers for native speakers. So for example, a movie made by English speakers for English speakers, this is native content. A conversation between two native speakers, that's native content. The moment language loses its realness is when it's being taught as language. This is my opinion, and so you may disagree, but I would say if you've spent over 10 years of input, then you must have read a lot of English books, like Wonso. You must have watched a lot of movies or a lot of dramas without any Korean subtitles, any English subtitles. You must have listened to so many, podcasts or radio shows. And if that's not the case, then I would say, well, you probably haven't gotten that much real native input. And so that's what I would say to those people. And it's not, a lost cause. Even having all that 10 years of maybe 1 hour, 2 hours a day of studying during school, well, that's a decent foundation. And if you started listening to native content now, watching native content, reading native content, then you'd be a step ahead of, other countries who maybe haven't had that exposure at all.
My last question today. So you talked about watching movies or videos without subtitles, right? Other than that, what else can people do to increase their input?
The easiest thing you could do to increase your input is listening. And so this could be listening to audiobooks, listening to shows you've already watched, right? Turning a show you've watched and listening to the audio version of it. Listening to podcasts, listening to radio shows. Listening is the easiest thing you can do because you can do it while you're doing anything else, while you're cleaning, while you're working out, while you're going to work, while you're coming back from work, while you're doing other work. You can always just put in a set of headphones, and if you're watching this video, you probably have headphones, you probably have a phone, then you could definitely just always have access to real native content. So, of course, creating good habits is worthwhile. For example, if the moment you wake up in the morning and you look at your phone, you should be clicking the play button on some sort of audio. This way you start your day by listening to English or whatever language you're learning. You should read more. The biggest problem is that a lot of Korean people think they read a lot, but they actually haven't even read one book, or they haven't gone through an entire blog. And it's gonna be hard. If you listen to hours and hours of English a day, at first, you're gonna be physically tired. You're gonna be really tired. If you're gonna read a lot, you're gonna be physically really tired. So it's kind of like working out. You gotta take it by small steps at first, but you do have to constantly get native input all the time if you want to get really good.
Just one more thing about what you just mentioned, right? One thing I keep telling my students is that they need to experience some sort of achievement, right? And the sense of achievement can, be their motivation to work even harder and for even longer, right? So when they're watching movies they don't understand without subtitles, and when they're reading books that just take them hours and hours to just, go through 10 pages, for example, it's going to be really hard for them to stay motivated. Do you have any tips for students about staying motivated?
Yeah, the thing about motivation, I think it's very personal. I've been learning Korean for 5.5 years, and up until this year, I've only learned it as a hobby. I only learned it because I wanted to. The same way someone might try to learn the piano or the guitar. If I want to do it, I'm going to do it. And if I don't want to, I don't want to. I can't speak to motivation for people who need English in order to better their career, better their education, because I haven't really been in that boat. But what I can say is, in terms of achievement, there's one thing you could do, and what that would be is, save everything that you listen to, save everything that you read, save everything that you watch. You could even just put it on a checklist, right? Like just the title of the content that you consumed. And in 4 months, in 6 months, in a year, come back to that content. If your methods are good, if you're learning correctly, the movie that you only understood 20% of, well, now you're understanding 30, 40, 50%. The book that you only understood maybe, let's say 60% of, now you're understanding 70, 80%. And you're going to be like, where did this come from? And it's from all the time that you put in. Or you could record yourself speaking. The idea of documenting yourself is not a bad way to use your language. It's not for practice, but every month if you record yourself speaking for maybe like 5 minutes about a movie you just saw, about a book you just read, about a person you just talked to, a year from there you're going to say, wow, I can't believe I improved this much.
I would appreciate it if you can elaborate just a little more about choosing the content. Which show should I choose? Because if it's too difficult and I understand nothing of it, then I get bored and I get tired and I just quit in 3 months, right? So can you explain just a little bit more about that?
Linguistically speaking, it's best to choose content that's right above your level. It's right above your level. Holistically speaking, it's best to choose content that you're interested in. And so the order actually falls like this. First, you should choose content that you're most interested in. And then if it happens to be at a good level, then you're lucky. But you should always choose content that you're interested in. And the reason is, if there's language at your level and you're not interested in it, you don't pay attention to it. Unconsciously ignoring the language. A lot of people try to control the difficulty of the language, and every time I've done this, I've hated it because I'm not actually genuinely interested in the content. So when you choose content, first, choose stuff that you're interested in. And the way you could think about it, this is one thing that I did and one thing that I do, is that you look at the content for everything except the language. Throw the language aside and say, hey, am I going to like this? So let's say you like action adventure movies, right? In your own language, in your native language. Well, the reason you're watching action adventure is probably not for the language. It's for the action, the fighting scenes, the war scenes, and the adventure, the travel, all the places that the characters are going. That's why you're watching that movie, for example. So there is language in the movie, and you get that as a reward. The language just happens to be part of that movie, but you're watching it for the action adventure. Or let's say, maybe you really have an actor that you think is handsome or that you think is pretty, and just watching them themselves is fun. Then the language comes as an added benefit. You're gonna watch it and you don't care what they say because you just like that. You're just a fan of them. That's another way to choose content. Or maybe that the show you're watching or the movie or whatever content you're watching has good background music. You enjoy the music, so it's calming or it's exciting, and that's why you like the show. You should choose content first for your own interest and try to leave language out of it. The language that will then come as a benefit. And then when it comes to reading, reading is really hard. Reading is not easy. A good tip is read the same way. Read stuff that you're interested in. If you open up a novel and it's just words, and it looks boring and you don't want to read it, don't read it. Maybe you try maybe you try a book for kids and there's some pictures in it, so it's kind of interesting and you go, maybe I'll try this. Well, then read it. You can also read adaptations of movies, adaptations of shows that are turned into books. And if you've already watched the show or the movie, you already have a big context base for what the story is about. But you should always choose content based on your personal interests. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to learn this language for the rest of your life, if you're going to learn this language at all, well, you should do it with real, genuine interest, not just because someone says to.
Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for sharing your insight with me and my subscribers. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope I was able to help some people at least. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so that was John. Don't forget to check out his YouTube channel as well. That's it for today. Thank you for watching my video. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. And also don't forget to hit the like button down below. And make sure you keep your notifications on so that you will not miss my upcoming videos. To the other side.